Welcome back to the Mountain Morning Show. I'm sitting next to the Recruiter Guy, Bill Humbert. So happy to have you on the show, Bill.
Joe, it's great to be here.
Thank you. You've had an exciting weekend.
Yes, we did. We went down to Escalante and we stayed at the Shooting Star Drive-In.
Really?
And it's an Airstream park, and you rent an Airstream for the week or for 2 days. And then they've got every night at 8 o'clock they show drive-in movies, and they've got convertibles parked out front, and you just grab whichever convertible you want and sit in there, and it was awesome.
So you guys were in a Cadillac, is that right?
Yeah, we were in a Cadillac, and nice red Cadillac. It was kind of funny. Some people got there a little bit late, and they kind of settled in their car, and they didn't like it. So the woman jumps out the right side, and she starts heading to our car, and then goes, there's people in that one. And so then she went running over to another car, and there's only 2 cars with people in it besides, us and another car, and then them. And she goes running to the only other car somebody was in. She goes,
Hard to tell when it's dark.
That's right.
But it sounds like a terrific time. What was the movie?
John Wayne, and it was She Wore a Yellow Ribbon.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
That's
great.
Really great.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's terrific. Well, you can't do all those fun things if you don't have a job.
That's correct.
Right?
Yep.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, that is your specialty. And one of the things that we don't often talk about is how important it is that an employer picks the right person, because if they don't, it's costly.
Right. We talked about this briefly the last time I was here about the cost of a poor hire. And I was working with a resort, and we talked about $10 an hour person and how much it could cost that company over 2 years. And did small groups, and the groups came up with $200,000 to $250,000 over 2 years, the cost of a poor hire. And one person said, a person like this cost us $32,000 last week.
Holy Toledo.
So can you imagine the cost of a salaried person and the $60,000, $80,000 a year range or more?
It could be your business. It could really shut you right down.
Business. Absolutely.
So part of this, to avoid this, is there's some strategies, including some behavioral interviewing. And what is that? Behavioral
interviewing, the premise is that people, when they find a way to do something successfully, will continue to do it that way. And so what happens is you develop your questions based on the goals that the people need to accomplish while they're at your company.
Right.
And so what you do is you ask them questions that would make them respond to situations.
Right.
Okay? Humans are so wonderfully predictive.
Yeah.
Once we find a way of doing something successfully, we'll do it that way every time. So, so when you find a way to successfully interview me, then you're going to do that the same way every time. And so behavioral interviewing, you ask them questions like, have you ever found yourself in a situation where maybe some team members were hesitant about changing the way they worked a process?
Right. And what did you do?
Exactly. And then how did you handle it?
And then it's the prospective employee's job to effectively communicate how they would analyze the situation and then react to it, right? And I think there's an acronym for this.
Yeah, situation, action, result.
Okay.
Okay. So lay out the situation. What was your action?
Right.
And then what was the final result for that?
And what this does for the employer is shows with this given situation how they may react in other similar situations, which are more directed at exactly how the business is operating.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's really cool. And so it's important to be, obviously when your employer may be doing this, the prospective employer, it's important as a prospective employee to know exactly, to have an idea in your head of a couple of scenarios where you overcame a difficulty, what are some of the other examples?
Well, it's really important to research the company before you go in.
And know what their tasks are.
Exactly. So when you know what that company is facing, then you can then say, okay, I probably need to talk about this time when I did this and that time when I did that. And so that way we're completely already prepared for those questions when they come in.
Yeah, you don't want to have to go, well, let me think about, I think I've got an idea of when this happened.
Right.
That would not look very effective.
No.
So there are some other ways that they may interview as well, and as an employer or an employee, we should be aware of. And what are some of the other ones?
One of my favorites is to, especially for salespeople, what I like to do is let them finish what they think they're finished, and then I go,
Just sit and ask them to continue?
I don't ask them anything.
Yeah.
I just be quiet and so humans don't like silence.
They don't.
And so you jumped right in, okay? Well, and it's great because that's what they will do also. And so I've had many salespeople just go right into the confessional and just confess all their sins to me.
Is that right? So you know exactly what you're getting into at that point.
Yeah, no, and so that means that the person doesn't listen.
Wow.
When they head into that. So the way from a candidate perspective to get out of that is to, is my answer sufficient? Do you need more information?
Would you like me to elaborate?
Right.
Something like that.
So, so you want the other person to start, the interviewer to start talking again. So that's how you get out of it. But most people don't know that.
Well,
so
a good salesman should know this, because one of the best sales techniques, they say, is that once you provide the request for action, so the sales pitch, this is how much this will cost. If you say one more word, the sale is off.
You're
if
done.
you wait until that other person responds, you will get the sale every time, typically. Not every time, but more often than not, is I guess the way of saying this.
Yep.
And that's the point. The winner is the person who talks last.
Right, or who talks the least.
Least, yep. So this is a really important consideration.
But during the interview, you need to be forthcoming. You need to tell stories. People remember stories.
Sure.
Okay, managers remember stories. I did a huge recruiting contract with MCI where we were interviewing 18 to 24 candidates per day, making hiring decisions every night. And with those on that interviewing tour, a lot of times at night, people were saying, I don't remember his name, but he was the one that discussed, and then someone else would, I know who it was.
Right.
So, so it's really important to develop stories around your accomplishments.
Now, as the other side of this, there are some important considerations as a manager of things to ask that you need to ascertain before you take on an employee that you should be prepared to question. And what are those?
Well, it's really important as a manager to know what the 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, and 12-month goals are for the position.
Right.
Because if you know that, then, excuse me, all of the skills and experience need to be successful that first year just become crystal clear. And so that's really important, is to know those goals. And then once you know those goals, then you develop your questions around those goals and meeting those goals. So, let's talk about, how would you come into our company and in the first 3 months begin to develop sourcing for companies who may need our services? How would you do that?
Yeah.
And so that way you get that person talking, so now you can make a better decision if they're going to be effective that first 3 months.
Right. Asking them what their impact will be is an important way of deciding whether they're on even the right track as far as what they believe the mission to be.
Right. Exactly. And so then the manager can then set them straight if they're wrong. No, that's really not what we're looking for. We're really looking for somebody who can do this. Can you talk to me about your experience doing that? And
this really tells you about the preparation of the person you're interviewing.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if they haven't bothered to even look at the website, which, I mean, in today's world, I remember a day when you went to an interview, and the only way you were going to know about that company is if you had somehow visited. There was no other way you were going to find out. Now it's all out on the table. The About Us on a website is tremendous.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, look at the press releases.
Right. That'll really tell you where the ball is and what the game is all about, right?
Yep, that helps a lot. And then go on LinkedIn and look up the manager on LinkedIn and try to determine where you might have common experience with that person, even down to the charities. If you have a common passion for a charity, then that's something that you can bring up during a conversation.
What's a big mistake that managers make in this situation?
I'll tell you their biggest mistake. There's 2 mistakes they make. The first one is a lot of time they don't listen to the response.
They're already looking for the next question.
They're looking at the next question. When I go into these interviews, lots of times, if a manager asks me, just kind of give me an assessment, Well, I'll go in, and they're looking at the list of questions. So the person's talking, and I can just see what they're doing. They're going, oh, man, I can't wait until I ask this question, see how they handle that. You
Right,
know?
and they're missing the answer to the one they're doing.
Exactly. And so the most important action for a manager during the interview is to listen.
Right, absolutely.
The biggest mistake for a manager is to feel pressure to hire somebody and then hire the wrong person.
Yeah, take your time. It's never that big of a rush. If it is, you're already in trouble.
You're in trouble,
right? If you're rushed to hire an employee, you're a month or more behind already.
Exactly.
So it's not gonna make a lot of difference going another couple of weeks to get the right guy,
get the right
or
person.
girl.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So one quick thing here: the guide to finding a job. Some good information on how a person should be prepared on their personal side of things for going to interviews. One being that you should be considering what your Facebook looks like, what your web presence looks like, the way your voicemail is set up, because people are going to be calling you.
Yep.
These are big things.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, try not to put your security settings on FaceMail as high as you can.
Yep.
Because you do not want potential employers seeing you there at a party, swilling drinks. You don't want that. You don't want them to see that. Or some of your thoughts maybe that are your private thoughts that you're putting on FaceMail. You don't want that
on Facebook,
seen
definitely.
either. And the problem that companies have is that the laws haven't caught up to the technology yet. And therefore, what could happen for the company is they say, okay, we're not going to hire this person because of what we saw on Facebook. Well, that could end up being a discrimination charge against,
all kinds of bad things could happen.
Yeah. So it's best if
on both
companies
sides.
need to be careful. But with candidates, I would just say stay away. Don't have any Facebook connections with the business connections.
All right. Well, Bill, as always, thank you so much for being on the show. If people want to find out more,
www.recruiterguy.com.
All right. Thanks again.
Joe, thank you.
All right. We will be back in just a moment. The Shakespeare Festival people are going to be here to talk about that, so don't go anywhere.
Awesome.
Not see him again. Why should all